Welcome, everyone, to March Madness at the Voice of College Football. This is going to be fun. Love it. All right. Appreciate you being here. Comments and questions there in the chat. As always, we have left the link as well. I will not be taking any calls for about 15 or 20 minutes, and then we are going to go full bore on all the calls that you would like to make. Going to present 3 NCAA tournament brackets in this style. One bracket is going to be the men's basketball bracket for 2024. Exactly what you're all filling out right now, that I used to fill out every March to try to win money or try to prove myself to be a basketball expert. So you can let me know in the chat, are you a believer of filling out one bracket? And that is the bracket. There is a term for that I have not heard in years, but there's a term. Basically, your bracket of credibility, your bracket of integrity, I think it is. So do you only fill out one bracket of integrity and say, hey, this is the one? And whether I picked all favorites or my favorite mascots or actually try to be a college basketball expert, here's the bracket. This is the only one I rely on. I can't say, oh, well, let's put this one to the side. Okay, here's bracket number 2 because I just lost in 9 games in the first round. Here's bracket number 2. Let's go. Or do you just fill out as many as possible? And this is what I want to have happen versus this is what I think is going to have happen. This is my wild card. Yes. So the bracket of integrity. So we are going to show you all the matchups in the first round concerning the actual NCAA men's basketball tournament that starts on Thursday. I know the play-in games, the first 4, they don't like to call them play-in games. They are play-in games. And it really sucks for the 10 seeds that are basically 10 seeds, but they have to play a play-in game. However, the first 4 of the play-in games, we'll let that go. If you want to offer up, once you see how we're going to set this up, if you want to offer some play-in opportunities for some football teams, let me know. But we're just going to show you all the matchups in basketball. But you're also going to see an alternate team there. And what is that alternate team? Well, that alternate team is the football equivalent of that particular basketball team, because we know that there are 3 million basketball teams that are eligible for the NCAA men's basketball tournament. And there's only 133 now, 135, I believe, going into next year, 2024, 135 FBS teams in football. St. Peter's doesn't have a football team. If they do, they don't play FBS football. So what I have done is I have targeted the team, the school that is closest in geographical proximity, that is going to serve as the proxy football team. And so we're going to see the basketball matchup, and then we're going to see the equivalent football matchup, which, of course, when it comes to Mississippi State taking on Michigan State, is simply the SEC and the Big Ten in football, Mississippi State and Michigan State. We've got a number of those kind of matchups that look like football matchups to us football-oriented folks. Then there are others where we had to find a replacement. Now, if you want to go to Google, if you want to MapQuest it, go to the GPS. If you want to take those terms and you want to check me on that, I might have missed it. I was not going to go to the painstaking activity and exercise of trying to figure out the exact school. And also keep in mind that many times we had an issue with Marquette in particular, that there were a number of schools in that area that were already in the tournament, football schools that had basketball teams in the tournament. Or when you go to the Northeast, so the Northeast is strong in men's basketball, but the Northeast is weak in football. So it took me a little big stretch to find schools that were the closest. So a lot of those schools may have been matches for other schools. And so we had to go far, far away to find a school. Okay. You'll see what we mean here in just a second. So those are basic 2 bracket looks, the basketball, and then the football equivalent of the 2024 men's basketball bracket. And then we also have the 2023 football equivalent on the football field based on the 23 standings. What would that 1 through 64 bracket have looked like? The 1 seeds, the 2 seeds, all through the 16 seeds. What would that 64 team football bracket look like in 2023? Appreciate you being here at the Voice of College Football. As always, Amazon link in the description section of all the videos. Please check it out. When you shop on Amazon, use the link that we provide. Who's here? Oh, conundrum, exciting, just pales in comparison to what it truly will be. But I know you did your best to come up with the best adjective possible. Yes, exciting is what this is. The Rod Farvis here, John D'Adamo. Good to see him. Michigan Live, of course, coming up on Tuesday. Oh, yeah, the Ocho is tonight at 8 o'clock Eastern time right here on the main channel as well. Ed, good to see you. That Michigan coach drives when he's drunken. That in Irish. Oh, boy, there's a lot there. That's a lot of typos included. Okay. And we will stay away from that one. I did deliver a Twitter post on that one. Not the best first impressions by the new Michigan defensive line coach coming from Wisconsin. Not the way you want to start out your new job. DeReal says the SEC tied for the most teams selected to be part of the madness. SEC. Or as I used to have to endure when I went to covered, didn't have to pay. Fortunately, of course, I wouldn't have. SEC football and basketball games. SEC. Yeah. Why wouldn't we hear the chants when they lost? Isn't the conference still a source of pride? Isn't it still? Why no chants when the conference loses? The Rod Farva says college basketball is dead. It has seen better times. No doubt about that. And who else is here? Jason's here and others. We appreciate you being here. We're going to be here for as long as this takes. We're going to run through the brackets, both the basketball, the football brackets, and also the 2023 football matchups, as it should have been, could have been, with a 64-team field. Okay, here we go. So this is the actual 2024 NCAA basketball football tournament. Here we go. So we've got number 1 seed UConn. And it's pretty obvious based on that seeding that UConn is back to the elite of college basketball. I don't know when that happened, but UConn's the 1 seed taking on Stetson. Stetson, I've become familiar with here recently. Stetson is in Central Florida. Thus, what's the football matchup equivalent? Voila, it's UConn and UCF, who actually forged a rivalry trophy that's kind of pathetic, but I forget what it was called, but it was the state of UConn, the state of Connecticut, and it was the state of Florida. It was some kind of, maybe it was the I-95 trophy. That lasted a long time in the American Conference, about 5 years. UConn and UCF, that's the football matchup of UConn and Stetson. Oh, North Carolina's a 1 seed this year. Look at that, taking on Wagner. And yes, I had to look up Wagner to see that it's located on Staten Island. And as soon as I designated Rutgers as the football replacement, I thought, oh, we're going to come across something here, because there's always seems to be a ton of small school teams in the New York, New Jersey area that reach the NCAA tournament. It just happens to be that way, at least based on when I used to watch. Then we've got 1 seed Houston, Phi Slamma Jamma, right? Against Longwood. And yes, I had to look up Longwood. It's in Farmersville, Virginia. And since Virginia is part of the field, I couldn't go to the University of Virginia as a football replacement. We went with Virginia Tech. Houston and Virginia Tech. Look at these matchups. Okay, UConn, UCF, North Carolina, Rutgers. They played in a bowl game about 10 years ago. Houston, Virginia Tech have never played to my recollection. Next on the basketball floor, the final number one seed is Purdue. Is Purdue finally going to win some games in the NCAA tournament and reach their potential and fulfill a number one ranking? Isn't Purdue like a 1 or 2 seed every year and never win anything? And one of my very best friends in the world is an engineer product of Purdue, loves his boilers, and he has been sorely disappointed year after year after year after year. It used to be Gene Cady that couldn't get it done. And I loved Gene Cady. And now it's, I believe Matt Painter would still be there, correct? Are Matt Painter and Curtis Painter related? All right, Purdue taking on Montana State. And the successor to Montana State on the football side would be Boise State. I like that football matchup. We've been playing college football for 150 years plus, and I have practically a near perfect recollection of the last 45 years in terms of teams that have played. When has Purdue ever played Boise State? I can almost guarantee it's never happened. It certainly has not happened in the last 20 or 25 years. Therefore, it's never happened. This is what's wrong with college football. We do not see enough matchups. We don't see these teams play ever. But we got stuck with seeing Texas A&M and South Carolina have to play as cross-division rivals for 12 or 13 years in a row. Purdue and Boise State. That sounds like a good football game to me, especially when they're at their better place. All right. Our next basketball matchup is the 2 seed against 15, Iowa State and South Dakota State. Difficult to find football teams in the Northeast, difficult to find football teams in the upper Midwest. Is that what that's called? The upper northern Midwest. So we had to go to the Golden Gophers of PJ Fleck taking on Iowa State. Iowa State against Minnesota. When have Iowa State and Minnesota played? They're in the same region. They should be playing occasionally. Can anyone recall an Iowa State-Minnesota football game? I can't. I don't believe they've played. Next up in the 2 seed category, we've got Arizona and Long Beach State. Arizona, a lot of basketball powers here are still basketball powers. That's good to see. Or just that's a observation on my part. North Carolina, UConn, Purdue, Arizona taking on Long Beach State. I could have went USC. I could have went UCLA. Again, I was not going to measure the mileage. Arizona, USC, of course, played last year. Longtime Pac-12 rivals, no more. And that would be your football equivalent. Tennessee, the 2 seed against St. Peter's, the 15 seed. Best I could do here would be Temple, Tennessee and Temple. Okay, this is where I couldn't come up with anyone. Somebody help me out on this one. Marquette. They're in Milwaukee, of course. And I see that Marquette, a great basketball power for years and years and years. Of course, the great Al McGuire, who won a national championship at Marquette in 1977. I couldn't go to Wisconsin. I couldn't go to Minnesota. I used them up. I couldn't even go to Michigan State to grab a football equivalent for Marquette. So if anybody can find a football equivalent to Marquette, Wisconsin's in the tournament. That's the point. No, not Wisconsin. They're in the tournament. I think I would have come up with that one. So, QWERTY, thank you. The Packers. Yeah, we should have thrown the Packers in there. Here we go. So, if you can find anybody for Marquette, beautiful. Against Western Kentucky, of course, they play football. The Hilltoppers, there we go. Another 3 seed matchup now. We've made it to the 3 line. Illinois and Morehead State. If anybody in the chat can name without Googling, of course, if you Google, then you don't need to know anything. Who is the first round quarterback who was selected out of Morehead State in 1980? Morehead State, 1980 NFL draft, first rounder. And I'm not going to give you any more hints because I think I would give it away based on the next hint I thought of. Anybody? Jason, thank you very much. Good job right there, Phil Simms. Taco, good job, Phil Simms. Okay, the Rod Favre, Washington for Marquette? Okay. No, Washington's nowhere close to Milwaukee. All right, Illinois and Morehead State, there we go. Illinois, Louisville. When have they ever played? Can anybody think of an Illinois Louisville football game? I would watch any of these games. I would want to see these teams that have never played on the football field just play a game. Illinois has scheduled games recently against Virginia and North Carolina out of the ACC, but no Louisville, unless I'm forgetting. Baylor is playing some good basketball these days. Baylor's an interesting school, aren't they? And we're not even going to go into the Art Briles situation. Just it's this little Baptist school in Waco, Texas, and they field really good basketball teams, or have over the last 20 or 25 years, and in women's basketball. And in football, they're just like a roller coaster. They're all over the place. They could be horribly bad. They could win the Big 12 like they did 2 years ago. Taking on Colgate. Colgate's located somewhere in the middle of New York State. And of course, Syracuse. What happened to Syracuse post Jim Boeheim? I don't know anything about Syracuse basketball now. Do not know who the coach is, but we had to pin Colgate with Syracuse. That is the closest proximity call there geographically. Baylor and Syracuse. I cannot remember any Baylor-Syracuse games. The Rod Favre, I dated a girl that played soccer at Morehead. Lots of drugs there. Okay. That's good to as a warning to all of us. Taco, I believe he is the only Super Bowl winning quarterback that came from a losing college. From a losing college. I don't know what that means. Meaning he had a losing record? John Elway often had a losing record at Stanford. Thank you, James. I love this because I don't really remember that game, kind of vaguely. 2001, last time Louisville played Illinois. That Illinois team won the Big Ten championship and got bludgeoned in the Sugar Bowl by Nick Saban and LSU. Louisville, Illinois in 2001. Thank you, James. Jason does not follow me on Baylor being interesting. Yeah, I maybe interesting was not the right term. I'm not going to be spending my time researching Baylor facts or reading the history of Baylor athletics or anything like that. True. They don't interest me that much. Of course, there was the Waco. What happened in Waco? This was like 20 years ago. There was some kind of hostage shoot-off situation that I'm forgetting about. Exactly what happened. Taco says the college has an overall losing record. You're probably right on that one. Thank you, Taco. Good trivia there. David Koresh. That's right. It's starting to come back to me. James says Illinois and Louisville played a series from 1997 through 2001. The only other time Louisville played the Illini was 1986. Okay. So they have played a few times during my time of coverage and expertise that I don't remember. 30 years ago, yeah, early 90s, mid 90s, which just hit me, the Rod Favre. OJ, that is going to be a 30-year anniversary. Oh my Lord, 30 years this June, 1994. June of 1994, because I remember watching most of that trial after I got my second job in television in Mississippi at WCBI and watched much of that trial in the newsroom there at WCBI. Wow, 30 years ago. Yeah, the OJ chase, the Rod Farva, and wow, I'm taking this down a path, but hey, why not? It's a basketball month. We can talk about whatever. The OJ chase, the night of the OJ chase, my wife and I, at the time, my wife and I were out to dinner, little dinner date. We come home and flip on the TV, and there was that during the NBA finals. Yeah. Yes, QWERTY, I know it's March Madness, and this is not a college basketball show, but we are merging the two. So pardon me if I go in all sorts of different directions. Just having a fun little get together here today. Here we go. Yes, Knicks, Rockets, really good series. Of course, the Rockets won this series. John Starks hit a game winner in game 6 that forced game 7. That was also right around the time when we came home from another little date and walked in the door, and there were, I had never known what these things were, but they were little earwigs. Do you know what I'm talking about? I think that's what they were called, earwigs. And there was not one in sight when we left. Got back a few hours later, and these little bugs that have these little tentacles and these sharp little curled ends to them were ingrained in the carpeting everywhere. It was the weirdest thing. We walked in and we were like, what is going on? We've been invaded. It's like the locusts have come down upon us. It's very strange. All right, so we march on with our NCAA tournament brackets, and I know we stopped here with Baylor and Colgate. So we move on to, and again, I hate to cross state lines on this. I like to keep it very local, but if you look at Creighton, it's of course in Omaha, right on the border of Iowa. And since Nebraska's in the tournament, we have Creighton, Akron as the matchup. The Akron Zips. How many times have they been in the NCAA basketball tournament? Because up until I stopped watching, I don't think they had ever been there. So anyway, we've got Creighton and Akron. And I'm also recalling just couldn't get enough of the USA Today sports page, but especially on the day that the brackets came out, that Monday paper, and they would give you a nice synopsis of every team. So we've got Iowa taking on Akron. This is going to be the first football matchup that I'm going to tell you I have no interest in watching. Iowa and Akron. Okay. I think Iowa would win like 12-0. Akron would not gain a yard. Akron would finish with negative yardage, but Iowa would not be able to put the game away. They would win 12-0. That would be the score of the Iowa-Akron game. The Rod Farva still has issues with earwigs. I had never heard of them in your yard, which that's bad enough, but at least they're in the yard. Ed is predicting an Akron win over, is this in basketball or in the football matchup against Iowa? All right, here we go. Next up, we've got Kentucky and Oakland playing basketball. Whoever Oakland is in basketball, I have no idea who that is. All right. I could have really tried to break this down to measure the distance between Stanford and Oakland versus Cal, Berkeley, and Oakland versus San Jose State and Oakland. No, just Stanford's good. Kentucky and Stanford, they've never played in football. James, if you can look up a Kentucky-Stanford game, I'm going to guarantee they've never played in the time that I've been watching football. All right, so there's your next matchup. The Wildcats of Kentucky, a 3 seed. DeReal should be happy. They've obviously had a nice little season, and they are expected to go far. Next up, we stay in the SEC with Auburn taking on Yale. It's a 4-13 matchup. Yale, the best I can do here. Yale is right on the coast. Yale is about less than an hour from where I used to live in Connecticut, in New Haven, down on the coast. New Haven, maybe not the best place in the world in regards to safety. Not a lot to offer there in New Haven, besides a lot of smart people at Yale, or from what I understand, what used to be smart people at Yale. Auburn, Boston College, again, there's no history there. Auburn and Boston College. We are bringing to the forefront all sorts of football matchups that could be played at some point. If college football is going to give us an NFL type model, they might as well give us games that we've never seen before. So Auburn and Yale in basketball. Auburn, Boston College. Again, that's the closest we could go since UConn was already taken up because they're in the tournament. Kentucky has never played Michigan in football. Michigan has never played LSU in football. That's a tragedy. Thank you, the Rod Farva. Kentucky and Stanford have never played. Oh, come on. Dave's here, says Akron is always the loser. You been to Akron? Yeah, I've been to Akron. It is Flint. I've not been to Flint with better basketball talent. Flint, Michigan, Akron has better basketball talent. Well, with in the one soul, one body, yes, it probably has better basketball talent. That guy versus the next 50 dudes. But I'm biased, but Akron, nothing wrong with Akron. Okay, here we go. Next up, we at Auburn. Now we've got Bama. And the way I took these down were in order of brackets, so they might be in the same bracket. I don't know. I just went through the brackets. Alabama, Charleston. Charleston's on the coast of South Carolina, so our equivalent there in football is Coastal Carolina. Poor Coastal Carolina's got to match up with Alabama. All right, next up in the 4-13 slot, we've got Duke and Vermont. And see, this is what I mean by having to go. See, this is not what I was going for here. I always like the previous one, Charleston Southern. They're on the coast of Carolina, Coastal Carolina. Boom, they're the football equivalent. This is not the football equivalent, but this is the only place I could go. This was the closest. Rutgers taken up. Syracuse was taken up. Boston College was taken up. UConn was taken up. So the Catamounts of Vermont, I believe I got that correct. I haven't thought about that in years. Vermont, the Catamounts, who once pulled off a major upset against Syracuse. That was probably about 20 years ago, taking on Duke. But now we have the Manny Diaz Bowl of Duke and Penn State is what we've got there. Okay, I could have gone with Buffalo. Buffalo's closer than Penn State to Vermont. Yeah, kind of. It's not. It's about the same. But I got you, Jason. We could go with Buffalo. Did not think of Buffalo. Here we go. Next up, we've got another 4-13 with Kansas and Stanford. And again, Stanford on the border of New York and Southern Connecticut. I've got no options. I went to Maryland. I went to Maryland for this one. Kansas and Maryland. When have they played in football? That once upon a time would have been a really good basketball game. Okay, we don't have to do anything with this matchup. We've got San Diego State against UAB. 5-12. And was it just last year that San Diego State went to the national championship game, or was that like 2-3 years ago? Or went to the Final Four? Another 5-12 here. We really had to stretch this one. St. Mary's, okay, close. Cal Berkeley, good. Grand Canyon. Well, I couldn't go to Colorado. I could not go to Colorado State. And actually, Grand Canyon, now that I think about it, is not in Colorado. Yeah, I did a big stretch up to Wyoming. I probably should have went down into the New Mexico area, I guess. So I butchered that one. And if you guys have a better suggestion, I'm sure you do. All right. Wisconsin and James Madison. There's a nice little football matchup right there. Next up, we've got another 5-12. And of course, 5-12 has been historically has been the upset line. Gonzaga, we went with Washington. Washington being the closest football school to Gonzaga, and Tulane being the closest football school to McNeese. Washington, Tulane. Nice little matchup. Next up, Duquesne out of Pittsburgh. Boom, they got a school right there. This is what I'm attempting to do. Pitt, BYU. Very nice. Next up on the 6-11 line, we've got Clemson. All right, I didn't know that they could play basketball, but we've got a Clemson team that made the NCAA tournament taking on New Mexico. 2 FBS football schools, so we are in good shape there. Hey, my workload is lightning. Texas Tech against NC State. They played in football in 2022, and I believe NC State won that game and may have swept the series, the home and home against Texas Tech. But it's a 6-11, the Big 12 against the ACC. Now we've got another football matchup that lines up well, 6-11, South Carolina and Oregon. Shane Beamer and Dan Lanning getting together. We've got Washington State taking on Drake. Drake is located somewhere in Iowa. Des Moines, I believe. Des Moines. So they're the Hawkeyes. Did not make the NCAA basketball tournament. So we've got a Washington State-Iowa game. They have never played. I can just about guarantee that. Iowa, Washington State. Next up, Dayton, the Flyers, taking on Nevada. So the Wolfpack are in play as a football team. Dayton, we just take it down I-77 to Cincinnati, or would that be I-71 to Cincinnati? And so we go with the Bearcats and the Wolfpack as a 7-10 football game. You know what? I did take Boise State, didn't I? I missed that they had made the basketball tournament. My bad. I used Boise State, I believe, for Montana State. So throw somebody else in there. Wyoming. All right. So we've got Florida and Boise State. Would like to see those two football teams get together. We've got a Texas-Virginia matchup. Ooh, that's an ugly football game. And I took some liberties here. I know that we had a Virginia-Colorado State basketball play-in game. I took some liberties there with Texas and Virginia. FAU and Northwestern. FAU took Illinois to the wire in football last year. Tom Herman and David Braun. And then we've got, there we go, the quintessential football matchup of all football matchups within this NCAA first round tournament. Well, no. Actually, I correct myself that it is coming. The quintessential football matchup is coming up next. But we do have Mississippi State, Michigan State. Mississippi State has played, because there are a lot of bowl tie-ins between the SEC and the Big Ten. Mississippi State has played Iowa in a bowl game a few years ago. They have played, man, maybe Mississippi State hasn't played too many bowl games against the Big Ten. Iowa, Illinois, unfortunately, after the passing of Mike Leach. Illinois, Iowa, they've played in the last 5 years. Northwestern beat Mississippi State. It was Northwestern's first ever bowl win in 2012, beat Mississippi State. And then Michigan State has obviously played the SEC considerably during the Mark D'Antonio era. They played Georgia twice. They played Bama twice. They would like to forget those 2 games against Bama. They lost to Bama 86-7. Michigan State, also against the SEC, defeated the Steve Spurrier team in 1999. Plaxico Burress, Michigan State defeated that Florida team in the Citrus Bowl. And let's see, Michigan State played LSU a couple times in some bowl games in the 90s. So there's history, of course, SEC, Big Ten. There we go. Okay, here's the quintessential football matchup. I don't think it's debatable. This is the one. Nebraska and Texas A&M. This is the Trev Alberts Bowl. Now, for those of you who follow the basketball tournament, okay, for everybody who follows the basketball tournament and believes in conspiracy theories, thank you, the Rod Favre I-75. It's been a long time since I drove that. Nebraska, Texas A&M. There has always been a theory by many that the NCAA selection committee is trying to put together storylines. And this would be an obvious one. Trev Alberts left Nebraska, his alma mater. He's one of the great players in the history of the school. He was doing really great things. He was likable. It looked like everything was in a good place for Nebraska athletics. And he takes off for Texas A&M. And they immediately get put together in the first round of the tournament. This is the type of approach that football should take in bowl matchups, especially with the declining interest in bowl matchups. This is the type of approach that should be taken. And we looked at those the last couple seasons to say, and I'm not the one that thought this up. There was somebody else out there that made its way to me. I don't know if that was a content creator or who that was that thought that up. So it was not me. The idea of creating storylines with bowl matchups. And they do that. They do that with the NCAA basketball tournament, and they're actually playing for a championship. And they still manipulate the matchups to create interest. More so should that be done during bowl season. Why are we not playing Notre Dame and LSU in a bowl game? Why are Oklahoma and USC not playing in a bowl game? Those are 2 of the most obvious matchups. And then I believe finally we've got TCU and Utah State, and we don't have to do anything with this matchup. We've got the Mountain West Conference taking on the Big 12. All right, so those are the football and basketball matchups this coming year, this week. So next up, we are going to the 2023 season, and we are going to go through what an NCAA football tournament would have looked like. All right. Before we do so, keep in mind the Amazon links in the description section of all the videos, including this one. Please grab the Amazon link. Use it when you shop on Amazon to help us grow the channel. And it is of no work for you. We have made this seamless. Grab the Amazon link. Please use it when you shop on Amazon. It is transparent to you. It's the one way that you can financially contribute to the Voice of College Football without spending a penny. We've got our Discord and we've got our Patreon. The Discord comes your way as a YouTube channel member and also as a member of Patreon. Do either one. We do our very best to mirror the benefits on Patreon and on YouTube as a channel member. So take your pick or join both. Be my guest. I was reviewing a few things today, and 20-9 against the spread involving Power 5 conference teams last bowl season. 20-9 against the spread. All right, here we go. Matchup number one, the 1 seed, the overall 1 seeds, Michigan. And we've got Auburn. How did I do that? Well, I basically took the college football playoff rankings to start us out. Generally took those. And then once those expired at 25, I just sifted through records, gave a huge preference, of course, to the Power 5. Their records are much more relevant, and mixed in the group of 5 schools that earned it with 10, 11, 12 win seasons. Michigan, Auburn. When have they played? Well, they played in the 2000 Citrus Bowl. They played at the 1983 Sugar Bowl. So they have matched up a few times. Now we've got a Washington matchup against Wyoming from this past season. And you guys let me know when we see a possible upset. Texas, the 1 seed, taking on Fresno State. The Bulldogs taking on the Horns. And then, of course, our final 1 seed is Bama taking on Air Force. Except for that Michigan-Auburn matchup, I do not recall these other teams ever playing. Washington, Wyoming, Texas, Fresno State, and now Alabama and Air Force. Okay, the 2:15 game is Florida State and Jacksonville State. And again, this is 2023 football standings. Georgia takes on New Mexico State. New Mexico State played 15 games this past year. They went 10-5 under our guy, Jerry Kill, who had to hang them up. We've got a 2:15 matchup with Ohio State taking on Texas Tech as well. Another 2:15 game. Gus Malzahn trying to pull off the upset against Dan Lanning in Oregon. That's a 2:15 game. Elsewhere from the 2023 season, Penn State and Georgia Tech is a 3:14 game. Georgia Tech won its bowl game, the Gasparilla Bowl against UCF. Penn State fell to 10-3 after a bowl loss. Mizzou and Syracuse. Fran Brown and the Cuse, Kyle McCord and company taking on Eli Drinkwitz and his 11-win Missouri Tigers. Ole Miss and Boston College, Bill O'Brien takes over. And of course, I know it's 2023. I keep mentioning these new coaches. But going forward here, we've got Ole Miss taking on Boston College. And again, after the Michigan-Auburn game, somebody tell me when any of these teams have played Washington, Wyoming, Texas, Fresno State, Alabama and Air Force, Florida State and Jacksonville State, Georgia and New Mexico State. Not that I would want to see those games, but Ohio State and Texas Tech actually played. Can anybody out there, big Buckeye fans, we got the Rod Farva here and others, can anybody out there recall? I'm thinking of an Ohio State Texas Tech game. I can actually think of 2 There was one that's extremely prominent. Thanks, John. Please hit the like button. I can think of 2 Ohio State Texas Tech games. And they both involved very talented Ohio State running backs, and they both were somewhat interesting competitive games for about a half, and then Ohio State ran away. Daniel got one of the 2 there in 2002. Of course, this was Maurice Claret's first game. Rod Favre was there 2002. Maurice Claret's first game. He exploded. Buckeyes won, I believe, 45-21. The other game was in 1990. And that was, I believe, Robert Smith's first game. I might be wrong on that. It might be a second game. Early in the 1990 season, Ohio State defeated Texas Tech. I used to know every score of every game in Ohio State history post 1970. I don't recall. 31-10 comes to mind. I might be wrong on that one. I think I'm thinking of Boston College. But again, 1990 at the shoe, Texas Tech, Ohio State. Okay. Back to the here and now. We've got another 3-14 game. Oklahoma, Virginia Tech. I'm mixing up here. Oklahoma played in the 2008 BCS championship game. They lost to Boise State in the 06 Fiesta Bowl, the one with the kid who proposed to his bride, the 43-42 Statue of Liberty game. I am losing track here. There was in the crazy 2007 season, yes. Kansas beat Kansas, Virginia Tech, Oklahoma, and West Virginia played in New Year's 6 games, and I can't remember who played who. One was a 48-28 game. Didn't Oklahoma crush someone like 48-28? Oklahoma beat West Virginia at 48-28, and Todd Reesing in Kansas beat Virginia Tech 24-21, I believe. So that would be, so they didn't play, but that would be the one time that they almost played. Thank you. Appreciate you guys looking up these past games. James says Washington and Wyoming played in 1979. And that was a really good Washington team. John says, speaking of rare matchups, Michigan, of course, plays Texas this year. They've only faced one other time. Of course, that was in the 2005. I always mix this. I don't mix it up, but there's some communication gap on bowl years because I like to just, it stays clear in my mind if I just cite the year of the season. Like last year's national championship game was the 2023 season. Michigan is the 2023 national champion. They are not the 2024 national champion, although the game was played in January and it was the 2024 national championship game. Michigan is the 23 national champion. So Michigan and Texas played after the 04 season. Michigan limped into the Rose Bowl after a resounding loss against Troy Smith and Ted Ginn in that group in 04. That was a great game. Vince Young, kind of the precursor to his Rose Bowl performance against USC the next year, had a remarkable final drive. And I believe the final was 37-35. Yes, Vince Young, Braylon Edwards put on a show. Okay, good stuff. Next up, this would be a nice little football game. Jeff Traylor, we'll see when he gets a big job, but for right now, he's doing the job at UTSA. 9-4 season last year, their first year in the American Conference, taking on Arizona. And of course, if we go 2023, it's Jed Fish. If we go 2024, it's Brent Brennan, Zona, and UTSA. And again, these are football rankings records taken from 2023 that produce these matchups. Iowa-Memphis as the 4-13 game. We've got a 4-13 matchup with LSU taking on Toledo. Jason Candle and the Rockets taking on Brian Kelly. And take your pick, whether it's Jaden Daniels, LSU offense, or Garrett Nussmeier. Another 4-13 game, Louisville and Rutgers, old Big East foes. So they have played a bunch in the 2000s. And two teams that just played this past season and have played a number of times because of the Notre Dame ACC contract. That's Notre Dame and Duke. Played a great game this past season on ABC on Saturday night. Notre Dame pulled it out, of course, with a 4th and 16 out of Sam Hartman, but that's your football matchup for 2023 in a playoff of 64 teams, Notre Dame and Duke. I would watch it again. Oklahoma State and North Carolina. Not a bad little game. I would have to admit that maybe I've got North Carolina ranked a little lower than I should. You can imagine the process of trying to rank all these teams and then missing somebody, and I'm not going to, forgive me, this is not a scientific experiment. This is not, going to be published for millions to see somewhere. So it's not, I'm not putting my name on this per se. So I just fit in North Carolina with a 12 seed. Shoot, they finished 8-5, so they're not that far off of the 12 seed. Oklahoma State, of course, went to the Big 12 championship game. Ollie Gordon and Alan Bowman, they're both back taking on North Carolina. That would be a good game. NC State and Ohio, the Bobcats, had a nice season and are well coached for sure. Taking on NC State and a 9-4 Wolfpack team. Oregon State, of course, was a really good football team, and then they fell apart in the bowl game after Jonathan Smith left and everybody departed to the NFL. Oregon State and UNLV, as we keep it out west with what was a Pac-12 Mountain West showdown. Tennessee and San Jose State minus Brent Brennan. Ken Niumatalolo, the new head coach at San Jose State, taking on Tennessee. Be surprising and kind of interesting to watch Ken Niumatalolo on the sideline for a passing offense, because he's not bringing his Navy offense to San Jose State. Taking on Tennessee. Next football matchup. And again, these are 2023 football results that go into this 64-team field. Tulane and App State. 6-12 doesn't make sense. It's a 6-11. There's another 6-11 with Clemson and Boise State. They have never played. Liberty and Iowa State. There's a 6-11 matchup. And if Iowa State could lose to Memphis, they certainly could lose to Liberty. We've got a 7-10 with Kansas State taking on Wisconsin. Sign me up for that game. I'll watch that one. Absolutely. Chris Kleiman and Luke Fickell. Kansas State and Clemson. Kansas State and Wisconsin. When have they ever played? All right, we've got another 7-10 game with Kansas and Maryland. That sounds like a good basketball game. Kansas and Maryland. Here's a 7-10 with West Virginia and SMU. SMU headed to the ACC. I don't recall these two schools getting together ever. Texas A&M and James Madison. There's a 7-10 game for you. We've got an 8-9 with Kentucky and Northwestern. They played in the Music City Bowl during the Mark Stoops Pat Fitzgerald era. Northwestern won by 1 point, I believe. Utah, and that would be Miami of Florida. They have never played. Utah and Miami. Sounds like an interesting football matchup. 2 more 8-9 games. We've got UCLA taking on Troy, and we also have USC taking on Miami of Ohio. There you go. That is the 64-team field for football. That's all I was here to do. We gave you the basketball matchups for 2024. We gave you the geographic football replacement matchups for 2024. Then we went back to the 2023 season and gave you the 64 team. Do you like that? Do you like those 64 teams playing? Do you like any of those matchups? Getting past all the teams that are going to be in a 12 or 14 team field and just looking at matchups that we will never see, and I'm basing them on the 2023, not that we will never see Michigan and Auburn play in a playoff game, but I mean, obviously they're not going to play when Auburn's 6-6. But that I would actually say, even though that team did not earn a playoff spot, I think this would be a good game or an interesting game, or it could be a really good game. Not that game. I would go down to the first game that hits me as a possible interesting game would be Virginia Tech going 7-6. Oklahoma was no world beater despite going 10-3. This could be an interesting game. There are upset possibilities there with Kyron Drones taking on the Oklahoma defense. There are upset possibilities there with Arizona taking on Texas San Antonio. We have upset possibilities here, Iowa and Memphis. Rutgers. Is anyone going to be surprised if Rutgers defeats Louisville in a football game? No. Duke, the 12-5, they actually were a 4th and 15 play away from defeating Notre Dame. Other matchups I would like to see. I'd watch Clemson and Boise State. Talk about two teams that nobody ever thinks of those two teams playing. And this might be my game right here. Kansas State and Wisconsin. Kansas and Maryland. Kansas is coming off a 9-4 season. If we put Jimbo Fisher out there to take on James Madison, if we bring back Jimbo to coach his 2023 team, he might have some shades of App State here, taking on James Madison. Last year's Northwestern team taking on Kentucky. I'll watch that game. One of the most anticipated games, one of the most interesting games that I could go for, Utah and Miami. Ralph likes Memphis over Iowa. Taco, I was going through the possible upsets, but if you're just asking me for sure, well, of course, they're not for sure because they're upsets. I would say, so how many games are in the first round? Let's see if there's 4 times 8, 32 games. I would say there are going to be, in football, of course, not as many upsets as there are in basketball, but let's say there's 5. See, I'm not buying Memphis and Iowa. I'm going to go Rutgers and Louisville Is Louisville really that much better than Miami? Rutgers beat Miami. I think that could happen. Again, we already saw that basically take place. Duke and Notre Dame. And it sounds like the Real probably has some upset plays for us. First caller, the Real MVP. What's going on tonight?
Nothing much, Mark. How about you?
You see what I'm trying to do here?
Yes, I am seeing what you're trying to do here.
So I don't
it's
know when you joined us, but so we laid out just the basketball matchups, which I'm sure you're extremely excited. Your Kentucky Wildcats are playing St. Peter's?
No, we're playing Oakland.
Oakland.
We don't want to play St. Peter's, okay? We're afraid of them. We don't want to play them again.
Oh, that's my mind actually going back to a loss against St. Peter's. Interesting. Yes, against Oakland. And then who would be the second round matchup most likely? Do we know?
Sorry, I couldn't hear your question. Can you repeat?
I was asking who the probable second round matchup is for the Wildcats.
Texas Tech.
Okay. Taking on NC State. Got it. So yes, so I was trying to find the closest geographic football replacement for the basketball teams that don't have FBS football teams. And then here we're just doing just the football matchups based on the 2023 season. So what do you see here?
Well, I see in that Duke Notre Dame game, I think Duke, with a healthy Riley Leonard, could win that game pretty easily. I like that 12. Those 12-5 seeds, Mark, in March is what you look for as your most realistic upsets, and I think that's a great 12-5. I also think this really goes to show you the difference in why expanding the college football playoff will have diminishing returns at a shorter point than March Madness. Because once you got to those 8, 9, 10 seeds, it's just tough to see them do anything competitive against the ones. Like, the gap between the 1 and the 8, 9s in college basketball is much smaller than it is in football and basketball.
Yeah, this UCLA team that Chip Kelly just coached last year, like if they're winning a first round matchup against Troy, then they're taking on a 1 seed.
Right, and they have no chance to beat that 1 seed, whoever that 1 seed is.
Yep.
So, and I think they would beat Troy because, they're a group of 5 team, Mark, and the group of 5 is terrible, and they're the group of 5 for a reason. It just is true. I can't help it.
You're right.
Troy lost to Duke without Riley Leonard and half their starters.
I hate to say this because in theory, I love the idea of group of 5 football. And I think the bowl games are fun. And I'd love to see that it's the only time of year that I can really focus on some of these group of 5 teams and watch them. But when, for example, the teams that played in group of 5 conference championship games, their very best teams were like 2-14 against Power 5 teams, like mostly middling Power 5 teams. It's just, we give way too much. The national pollsters give way too much credit to these group of 5 teams.
Right. And a perfect example of this, and which nobody has really talked about, is SMU. I mean, they got thoroughly beaten by a terrible Boston College team, Mark. I know you're doing that +3, -3 thing. SMU was one of those. I've almost got it a lock at -3. They could legitimately be one of the worst teams in the ACC.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I believe they were 10-2. Yeah, they were 10-2 last year. Yeah, they got to go. They got a best 7-5. Yeah. Yep. They're not doing that.
Right. I would put them. Honestly, there isn't a team in the ACC I can say with 100% confidence or even 90% confidence they can beat. Even your Syracuses, your coastal teams, I can't say they're any better than any of them. And I know SMU's excited to join a Power 4 conference, Mark, but they're going to get a rude awakening going for it. I mean, look at what the elite Power Five, the Group of Five teams did in the Big 12, a weaker conference overall from top to bottom. They all got trounced, and we're taking a weaker team and putting them in a stronger league. It just don't make sense, Mark.
Yeah, well, it's going to be contingent upon them to follow the path of TCU, Utah, and a few others who were able to work through some growing pains and transition and build depth and had a plan, had a really good coach, and were able to, within 2 or 3 years, compete.
Yeah, I just don't think they have the fan base and support they once had in order to get that level of stature. Like, they're probably the 11th or 12th most important team in the state of Texas right now.
Yeah,
and I don't see that changing.
Yeah, when we looked at the TV ratings, and it's funny because they actually play more what we would consider network television games than a lot of teams in the ACC and the SEC, and even the Big Ten, if you don't consider the Big Ten network a national network, because they're always playing on ESPN2, playing a lot of Thursday and Fridays on ESPN, and their TV numbers are atrocious.
Right. And I listen, I see Ralph was comment talking about the money. Mark, they had the money last year, the year before that, and they weren't even good in a worse conference. I understand people think you can just throw a bunch of money on something that just solves every problem imaginable, Mark. But I think if that was the case, society would be in a much better place than it is right now. Wouldn't you agree with that?
Oh, of course it would. There are problems that take money as a component, but need a whole lot more. So money in and of itself doesn't solve anything. However, they obviously see what's going on in major college football and wanted to find a safe haven. I don't know that they found that in the ACC, but they were also so starved for big time college football that, of course, they're taking zero financial compensation for this. So maybe they'll be able to attract better football players. They better be able to attract better football players, being able to sell them on playing in the ACC.
I just don't see that working out for them, Mark. I mean, they've got, like, at that level of play, yeah, I could be a 2-10 ACC player, or I could play for UTSA and be 11-1 in a G5 conference. If I'm not making the NFL draft either way, just give me the 11-1 team. I'll win some games. I'll have high morale. I'll win a conference championship potentially. You know, it'd be fun experience. I can't just imagine losing week after week after week. So I think SMU's in a really rough spot.
Although Ralph's comment about money also could be playing into NIL. And I think he just posted that. There we go.
Yeah, I mean, Mark, Ohio State, where were they ranked before NIL and post NIL?
Yeah, nothing's changed.
Everybody says this as if it's just everything's changed. And I know we got the Big Ten Nation out there that believe they're going to be the best conference because of NIL going forward, Mark. But I need to see actual results on the football field before we just make these proclamations.
Well, I do think that what we've seen in college football over the last 10 years, and maybe even before that, is that these elite programs, they're the ones that don't change. They're the ones that are able to, they just have everything working for them. They've got the brand, they've got the history, they've got the money, they've got the boosters, the alumni, the resources, the everything. And it just keeps feeding itself. But I'm only talking about 6 or 7 schools.
Right.
That
You're
I don't
talking.
expect to change. I'm talking about Georgia, talking about Ohio State, talking about Alabama, talking about Texas, even though they've just re-arrived, joined us once again after 15 years.
Right. Now, if you want to say because of NIL, they could do like a TCU type thing where they can pop up for once a year every decade or something, I'm more inclined to believe that than them being consistent power again. But I just don't see them any of these teams, G5 teams that have been elevated, doing anything. And SMU is clearly the worst example. Like I don't see Stanford and Cal doing anything in the ACC either because of how many times they're going west to east. I mean, teams usually who go west to east do worse than teams that go east to west traditionally. So I think that's going to have an effect on them and the 4 schools going to the Big Ten.
Yeah. And to your point, because they're losing time.
Right.
They're losing time in preparation for the game.
Well, also, it's your body literally physically
losing time.
Changes.
Yeah.
Right. Well, it's not just it's a physical thing is what I'm trying to say, other than a mental thing. When you say losing time, that I don't think that fully gravitates the situation. Mark, I mean, when you worked at ESPN, did you notice differences between flying out east for assignments and flying out west for assignments?
Oh, absolutely.
Could you share some of those experiences and how that could relate to these teams?
Well, first of all, I didn't travel much for my job in particular, but I did have a reason to fly to California for a few years on a regular basis from the East Coast. And the flight west, you're gaining time. So, for example, if you've got a 5-hour flight and you just gain 3 hours, then it was like a 2-hour flight in regards to not losing much time as opposed to practically killing a day coming back in the other direction.
Right. And there's a stretch of games for USC in particular where they play Penn State at USC and then they have to fly out all the way to Maryland. I could easily see USC beating Penn State but losing to Maryland just because of the time differential. And then they have to fly back the next week. Like, I think we're going to see some odd results from the West Coast this year we wouldn't normally see because of travel. Now, I know they got private jets and all that stuff, but still, these are human bodies with human experiences and young people with emotions and stuff. So I think we're going to see odder results than normal.
If they're playing Penn State in prime time and they're flying overnight on Saturday night into Sunday to get back home, and then they're playing Maryland at whatever time the next Saturday, I wonder if there would be any consideration to staying out east.
I don't know. And that's an interesting question. I think each coach and staff is going to have to delineate to, but it's just an interesting thought, Mark. I mean, when we're talking about these college football games, these type of small margins and stuff matter at the highest levels. So I haven't seen anybody brought it up yet. So I thought, it's the off season, it's March Madness time, and we got nothing else really to talk about. So why not talk about the time zones?
There we go. Well, we are also talking about coaches' rankings, so I'm going to continue to deliver those videos out there on coaches' rankings. So folks, check those out. We're ranking all the Power 4 coaches, and then we'll get to the group of 5 as well.
Yeah, I've got to ask you about one coach in particular. Yep. I was surprised he was as low as he is. And I know Moose is in the chat, so he's going to be surprised I'm defending him. But I thought Sharon Moore was lower than expected. He's not a brand new coach. He's done everything you basically can ask for. And I actually liked his in-game calls going for it on 4th down, being aggressive. So I think he's got a pretty good body of work, and his players seem to be bought into him. Now, I'm not saying put him in the top 10 or anything like that, no, but I think he is one of the 25 best coaches.
Okay. I had him at 31. And I would say that his 4th down decisions were rather obvious.
Okay. I mean, that's fine, but I don't know. For an interim coach for him, I felt like most people would have played it safe there because they're an interim coach and they don't want to try and screw it up. I like the aggressive nature of him. And you got to give it credit that he actually made the calls. and he seems to be a good culture guy, that the players like him, and he seems to be doing decent with that type of stuff. So I don't know.
I just felt I had to be, I thought I was being rather aggressive with his ranking to a certain extent. There are some approaches out there where if you are a first year head coach, you just automatically get ranked at the bottom. If there are 7 first year head coaches, they're going to be the final 7 in the rankings. I take it more from the standpoint, first of all, that take Sharon Moore out of the mix because he did coach 3 games. That with the other first year head coaches, I consider what they've done is exactly neutral. There's nothing there. There's not a head coaching resume there. So if there are coaches that I believe have underachieved, I'm going to rank them below the coaches who are first year head coaches who are neutral at this point. And that's very few coaches because obviously if you underachieve very long, you get fired. But with Sharon Moore at 31, I thought that was a rather aggressive statement in that he only coached 3 games and he was not the coach for the preparation during the week.
I get that. I think it's a knock against him, but he did look pretty impressive in those 3 games, and those 3 games were against high caliber opponents. I mean, you talk about overachieving. Beating Ohio State in the way they beat Ohio State, where they led most of the game.
Yep.
Pretty impressive. I mean, how many coaches would be able to do that with that talent that Michigan had on their roster last year? I don't know of too many coaches that would be able to do it. So I got to give him credit for it. And also the Penn State of him not going away from what was working in the run game. Got to give him credit for that as well. He saw something worked, and too many coaches just fade away from it because they feel like they got to hit a certain pass run ratio. He just stayed his course, so I give him tons of credit for that.
Yeah, I can see that again. I want to see that again. David Braun of Northwestern, there's an example for you right there. And I made the statement in the video that if we are just basing this, and theoretically I am just basing that on current performance, and we don't have any real examples of having to skew rankings much. It's not as though we've got a Bobby Bowden or a Joe Paterno hanging around after 40 years and we have to say, well, this guy's one of the greatest coaches of all time, but I've got him ranked like 27th now. So there aren't real egregious examples of that. But with David Braun, based on what he did last year, I could rank him as the number 1 coach in college football. But I have to see him do it again. And I'm giving Sharon Moore the same type treatment. I'm giving him a rather lofty ranking considering a lot of inexperience. But based on his small sample size, it's very impressive.
I can understand that opinion, and I largely agree with that opinion. You got it. If he goes 10-2 this year, or he makes the playoffs, I think he's definitely one of the 25 best coaches in the game, because I don't expect them to make the playoffs this year. They're going to be underdogs at least 3 games this year, and I don't see a 9-3 Michigan team making the playoff by the committee. So if he gets to 10-2, he'll have to either beat Texas, Oregon, or Ohio State. And beating one of those 3 teams, I mean, with the lack of talent they're going to have this year, Mark, I mean, they've got basically scraps. I mean, that's a little disrespectful, but they're not nearly good enough to be a serious threat for the national championship, Mark. I mean, they're like 9th in the odds market right now at plus 1,600 according to FanDuel. So, and they're going against elite teams. And so if he knocks off one of those 3 teams, I'll be wildly impressed.
Well, you don't have a whole lot of equity with the Michigan contingent here, DeReal. So I do understand your take. I think it's a bit extreme. I think that Michigan's probably okay. So Ralph here is saying that Michigan at 9-3 is a lock for the playoffs. Look at that schedule. I understand his point. Ralph is making a point here that I get, but I don't think they're a lock for the playoffs. I think that we got to put it in context of what else is going on in college football. And if you look at the format and what has transpired in the last 10 years and put that into the model, the format, 9-3 does not make anybody a lock for the playoffs.
Right. Like, I've been pretty consistent when it comes to this. I would put a 9-3 Michigan team in the college football playoff. I think they've earned that spot regardless of how they get there.
Yeah. Well, you're less about record and more about schedule.
Right. However, I don't think the committee is going to put a 9-3 Michigan team in the college football playoff. I think they're going to put a 10-2 ACC team ahead of them, or an 11-1 Big 12 team that didn't win their conference championship above them.
And that's the big question I have going into this, is there going to be preferential treatment given to the SEC and the Big Ten just based on, well, first of all, we're going to have non-conference games to evaluate the conferences, as we always do. We're going to have Texas and Michigan. We're going to have, trying to think what the other big games are. We're going to have USC and LSU. We're going to have these big non-conference matchups that, by extension, if you do it right, if you have proper perspective, you can then relate to the conferences to make some evaluation on the strength of the conferences, and then see if did the SEC earn more than what their records show. Did a 9-3 Texas team, Tennessee team, did they earn it because they played the best teams in the SEC tough and they won their non-conference game impressively against whomever that was? Or is the committee going to not even wait to see that proven on the field and just going to come out of the gate with this bias toward those two conferences? Or, as we've discussed, are we going to have to get to a place 3 or 4 years down the line where the playoff results are going to move the committee to say these leagues, whether it's the SEC or the Big Ten or both of them, have a track record that we're going to give them a push. We're going to give them a bump based on their postseason success from previous years?
Well, that is the big question entering this season. Out of all of the questions, I think that is the most important question. And Mark, I'm normally in disagreements with Moose, but did you see his latest comment he left? I'm just so proud of him. I think he finally gets it, Mark. That the SEC and Big Ten should be favored because they're just flatly better. Mark, I've been saying this about the SEC before the Big Ten expanded and got these 4 teams, and he would trash me. So I'm proud of you, Moose. Like, thank you for joining the correct side of this discussion and debate, Moose.
Well, that's because Big Ten's included.
Exactly. I mean, I don't want to say that, Mark. I want to think he's wising up, and he's been enlightened by just being a superior conference, having superior athletes, and having more difficult schedules, and wanting to get rewarded for that instead of playing cupcakes like Maryland, Purdue, Indiana, and all those, Illinois, and all those teams. So I'm glad he's joined the SEC side of the table, and I would like to welcome him. Thank you, Moose, for leaving that comment. That might be my favorite comment of the night.
Wow. It had that much of an impact. It seemed fairly obvious to me.
It is. Well, it's been fairly obvious to me, but when you try to say something for 2 to 3 years and it can't get through to him, it's just so proud to see this finally get through to somebody. This is like an enjoyment. This is almost as good as when Kansas City won the Super Bowl, Mark. Like, it's almost as good as that.
Whoa.
Yeah, I know.
I'm guessing if we had to narrow down this comment to just select one conference, then the disagreement would then rear its ugly head.
Maybe, but at least he gave the SEC the respect it deserves to at least be in the discussion. So
let's step this back, though. How about this? What if the Big 12 and the ACC perform better than expected in non-conference play? And while you're mulling that, I'm going to bring up the week 1 schedule. So what if we don't get the results that we expect?
Well, if that's the case, first off, this is going to be a great college football season, and there's going to be tons of, which would justify the 12-team playoff. And I think convert of the non-believer side, which I am a part of, into believers. So that would be great for the overall health of the sport. It also would tell Florida State that they can be in the ACC, and they're a legitimate conference. So I guess they would stay in the ACC for a bit longer.
So North Carolina and Minnesota, that's not moving the needle for anyone. Let's see. Texas and Michigan, of course, is a huge game, but those are the 2 conferences we're talking about. So unless one of them gets completely annihilated, that's not going to change anything. But we've got, Miami and Florida. That, unfortunately, that's not going to change anything because Florida's not a factor. How about if Clemson beats Georgia? That's one.
That would be something, Mark.
That's one right there. What if, although it's not going to help the ACC or the Big 12, Notre Dame beats Texas A&M? What if there are some embarrassing losses in there by some decent Big 10 and SEC teams where they lose to, maybe Penn State loses to West Virginia? There's one right there. Those would be 2 that would come to mind. All right, they're in week 1. What else could change the narrative? There's not many. Week 2, Oklahoma State beats Arkansas. That's not going to do much. Cal beats Auburn. We get a Houston win against Oklahoma. I'm really stretching it now. We get an NC State win against Tennessee.
Yeah, that could happen for sure.
So, of course, they're not all going to happen. But if a majority of these really big games between the ACC/Big 12 versus SEC/Big 10 go the unexpected way, then I just hope that this committee is going to reward those results.
I would hope so too, Mark. I've been a fan of the results from the very beginning. And that's why I've said the SEC has been the best conference, because I look at the results on the field. And something I noticed in there was there isn't a whole lot of ACC/Big 12 teams playing SEC/Big 10 teams. It almost to me seems like they're kind of soft separating from them to automatically. And does that make sense?
Let's see if we've got anything. Yes. Although I don't know that they could have anticipated this years ago when they were scheduling these games. Let's see. This is week 3. Ole Miss, Wake Forest. Boston College, Missouri. This is out of that discussion, but could provide an upset. Tulane at Oklahoma. Yeah, there's not much. That Maryland, Virginia. How about Oregon State, and Washington State? I just like that they put both of these games on the same weekend and that they just ensure that these 2 rivalries continue. That's
Yeah, it's nice, Mark, for the G5 to get some love in the national spotlight. I'm so happy for those smaller schools, you know? It's great to see the smaller schools finally get a chance to beat the big boys.
so we've got that. We've got yeah, that's probably about it until, of course, the ACC SEC final weekend.
Right. It also depends on how these schools, these Big Ten schools, do relative in their own conference. I mean, if they're all at the bottom, it's not going to have that big of an impact now versus if they're at the top. So that's something else. And with the just amount of teams in the conference, it's going to be hard to get a lot of these matchups and compare them. Oh,
yeah, we really only found 4 or 5 games that are going to matter.
Right, and I was expecting a few more than that, to be honest with you. I'm surprised it's that little. Like,
basically, we've got, and some of these are such stretches that there could possibly be an upset, but I'm going to go to the final weekend. Of course, you got Kentucky, Louisville. Well, most likely they're both going to be 7-5, 8-4 teams, so that's not going to move the needle. Georgia Tech defeating Georgia, Clemson defeating Georgia. We threw up the Penn State West Virginia game. Who's Florida State's big game?
well, Florida plays Miami, Florida State,
Yeah, they
and
do.
UCF. So if Florida somehow to be an 8-4 or even 7-5 team with the schedule they've got, but lose to 2 or 3 of those teams, I mean that's mad credit.
Yeah, but I'm looking for ACC and Big 12 opportunities to knock off the Big 10 and the SEC. That's what I'm looking for.
Right, UCF, Florida State, and Miami all play Florida. If
UCF plays Florida, okay.
Right. If they knock off Florida and Florida goes 7-5 and beats like an LSU and Ole Miss team,
sure.
I mean that's mad credit to them.
But if Florida is losing to UCF and Miami, I don't know what concoction we have to put together that same team is going to beat the likes of LSU and Ole Miss.
Well, if LSU's defense doesn't improve, I mean they can score 200 points. That could be one way it's done to beat LSU.
Yes. We have uncovered something here that is disappointing me gravely that I really didn't factor in looking at all these games. We don't have enough Big 12 ACC against the SEC and the Big 10 to try to prove a point that there's more equity or balance. What's the Pete Rozelle term? There's a parity. There's as much parity as I know that there isn't, but I would like to see be rewarded if it does exist.
Yeah, so I feel like that narrative is kind of can't be refuted this year in any substantial way, which is disappointing. To be frank with you, because I want
my hands.
Right. Well, I just want the SEC to beat every single ACC school by 60 points just to tell the Florida State man that it can happen to anybody. So I'm disappointed in it, Mark. I want Georgia to beat Clemson so bad. Clemson never wants to play Georgia, Alabama, or any legitimate team again.
What do we have against Clemson?
They're in the ACC, and, we're just proving a point to Florida State, man, to, pipe down. You're not all that. Florida State basically thinks they're Ohio State, when in actuality, they're, like an Oregon or a Washington. They're like the mashed potatoes on Thanksgiving Day. I mean, they're a nice side dish, Mark, but you can go without it.
I don't have much of a response to that because they have been all that in their history. They are not all that right now unless they continue to do what they did last year and do it against better teams.
Right. Now, I know they went 13-0, Mark, and credit to them for going 13-0. But at no point during the season did I think, man, Florida State can compete with Oregon or Ohio State or Georgia or Alabama. Did not see that coming at all. And unfortunately, we'll never know because Jordan Travis broke his leg against Northern Alabama. But, I mean, if you're losing 14-0 or 10-0 to North Alabama, Mark, I mean, how great of a football team are you?
Yeah, they had quite a struggle against Boston College. And Riley Leonard and Duke had a lead in the third quarter before he got hurt.
Pitt took them to the wire. That was a game in the fourth quarter. They could have lost it.
Yeah, I don't know that it went to the wire, but yes, point well taken. It was a near 4-quarter game.
Right, and I mean, none of these teams are exactly, top. They're what, top 60 teams, top 50 teams? I mean, if an SEC team did that, all I would hear from the Big Ten fans is, man, Virginia was able to compete against Tennessee. The SEC is garbage. That's all I would hear.
Yeah, and those weren't even mid-level teams from the SEC in the Big Ten. That wasn't like Florida State was struggling against Wisconsin or Mississippi State or Kentucky. The teams that they struggled against were the ACC equivalent, and meaning they weren't as good.
Right. I see Dave, Minnesota Dave, in here talking about me being elitist. A Minnesota, listen, I'm a Kentucky fan, so I can speak to Minnesota fan here. We should be thankful we're just in the conferences because we can be like them. So we got to bump up these conferences. So you should join me in this elitist fan club, okay? How about Minnesota does their job and stop losing to teams like Bowling Green every single year or every other year? How about they do that, Mark?
Yeah, Minnesota's at a bit of a crossroads here. Vegas doesn't think a whole lot of Minnesota football. They had the lowest win total projection in Vegas in the Big Ten.
Now, I just like these. Sorry, Mark. I just like these comments coming in. Somebody told me,
yeah,
to stop doing conference pride. You should tell that to the Florida State fans chanting ACC, ACC. Listen, I didn't start this. I mean, the SEC it did invent it and does carry it around, but it's just smart strategy to inflate your conference.
Well, I think it started with people taking exception to you not giving the just due to mashed potatoes.
Yeah, I'm just not. I'm more of a green beans and corn type of guy myself, Mark. I can go without mashed potatoes. I mean, they're okay.
Now, in terms of conference pride, the Rod Farva certainly has his opinion on this. I have my opinion on this. And what my opinion is that if you have conference pride, more power to you. That's great. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I also don't think it's necessary. I don't have an issue with the fan who says, I don't care about the rest of my conference. I don't care how good they are. I just don't care. I only care about my school. I also don't have an issue with the Big Ten fan, the SEC fan, the anything fan who want to stick up for their conference. I had conference pride growing up. Nobody told me to have it. There weren't internet shows and all of this information and all this content being thrown in people's faces for anybody to tell me. It just happened. I don't know how to explain it. Probably similar to a lot of my preferences in life, and college football being one of them. Nobody steered me toward college football. I became a college football fan when I was 8, and I had absolutely zero influence to become a college football fan. And the same with conference pride. I just watched these bowl games, and I knew I am rooting for the Big Ten. Nobody told me to do that. Nothing. And it wasn't like I had the brain development of a 25-year-old to process that. That was like an 8 or 9-year-old thinking, I want all the Big Ten teams to win bowl games. So I don't think it's stupid. I think that it's one of those things that, for me, I think either stance is just fine.
Right, Mark. I mean, for me as an SEC fan in general, I mean, first off, you're more interested in more games. And it's also good for your rating and what bowl game you're going to be in, your conference seed and stuff. Because you play tougher teams that go out and win more games, you're going to be seen as a higher team. So if you push everyone down and everyone's 0-12 and you're 13-0, oh, what did you accomplish? That's where I don't get it from. I think it's just smarter to root for everyone to do well outside the conference.
Yes, it's smarter. But my argument for my own personal experience wasn't out of some type of cognitive decision. It was just a feeling. It was just have you ever gravitated? I'm sure many people can relate to this. Just gravitated to a team or something, and there was no reason to. It wasn't like, okay, I grew up in West Virginia, I'm going to be a West Virginia fan. No, you were just drawn to something. And I'm saying that different than being a bandwagon fan, that just because teams win, you like them. And one criticism against you that I've never understood, because certainly I don't know that a lot of people listen with a reasonable or objective ear, is that you have made it extremely clear that you believe that the SEC has been the best conference. The facts and the results have shown that and backed that up. But you, on the other hand, are a Kentucky fan and have in no way inflated or overblown their status in college football. So people tend to criticize you for throwing up this SEC shield in front of Kentucky to deflect everything. And for you, it's been my opinion and my perspective in zillions of conversations with you that those are two completely different topics. One is we're discussing conferences, and the SEC is the best. The SEC's been the best, and these are the results, and they really can't be debated well. And over here, I'm a Kentucky fan. Some years we suck. Some years we're decent. Oh, this year we had a really good year. We went 10-3, and I'm really proud of us, but I'm still not claiming to be Georgia. Just this is who we are.
Exactly. I know my place, Mark, in college football. And listen, even for Kentucky basketball is the number one SEC school in basketball. Hopefully nobody will argue that. And you know what they chant sometimes after they win their games is SEC, Mark. So if it's only because these crappy teams do it like South Carolina, then somebody needs to explain why the most successful team in basketball chants SEC. That's just something people I just don't think realize is it's just different down here, Mark. I mean, you know, it's kind of like what you do with your family, Mark. I mean, I'm sure you have family members and stuff you tease and you play with and you make fun of. But then if you see somebody on the street make fun of them, you're going to have their back. And that's kind of the way it is down here. Listen, I'm allowed to mess with Vanderbilt and South Carolina and Tennessee. But if you all do that, I'm going to have their back to the end because they're part of us. It's just different down here. I mean, Mark, I wish I can explain how much more meant down here, but, you know, hopefully the marketing department will come up with a saying that can express it.
Yeah, they'll have to work on that. Maybe something you've said in the last few minutes they could put together in some way.
Yeah, that would require somebody of far more intelligence than me. But anyway, Mark, it's always good talking to you, good killing some time, and I'm just hoping we don't lose to Oakland this year.
Yes, that would be bad. We'll hope that Jose Canseco or Mark McGuire don't hit a late inning home run on the Kentucky Wildcats.
Yeah. You know, in a few years, you won't be able to make that joke because they're going to leave to Vegas.
Yes, I'm aware of that. Yes.
Which is so sad because they're great sports fans and they care about their team, but the ownership don't care about that. But that's a whole different topic, Mark. Good seeing you.
Thanks, DeReal. Appreciate it. Yes, it is a different topic, a topic that I would have been largely very engaged in a few years ago with Major League Baseball, of course. All right, folks, we do appreciate you being here at the Voice of College Football. So if you're just joining us, circle back, rewind. This is what we did. We looked at the actual basketball matchups that are coming Thursday and Friday. And then we took the schools that don't have an FBS football team and we replaced them geographically with the closest replacement we could find and looked at those matchups, which most of them have never been played, or at least not during our lifetimes. And then we looked at the 2023 football season and devised a 64-team field and those matchups to see what kind of matchups we would have had for a college football NCAA type tournament this past season of 64 teams. All right, folks, appreciate you being here at the Voice of College Football. We have released our coaches' rankings. We've got a video that of us delivering 69 through 51 and then 50 up to 26. We'll do our top 25 here. We should release that on Tuesday. We've got our USC show coming up later tonight. That's Trojan Conquest at 10 p.m. Eastern time right here with you, actually, on the USC channel. Up next is the Ocho with John D'Adamo at 8 p.m. Eastern time right here. And then the USC show at 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 Pacific. Thank you all once again. Be looking out for the state of the Voice of College Football. It's going to be a massive live stream we're going to do here in the next few weeks. I believe I've got a day and a time, but until we have shored that up, we will just sit on that for another day or two, but we will be releasing that here very soon. So be looking out for the state of the Voice of College Football live stream coming up here in the next week. All right, folks, 8 o'clock with John, 10 o'clock with Tim, Matt, and myself, and we will see you soon. Most of us are on the internet pretty much all the time. It's fun. You get to socialize. You get entertained, and in this day and age, it's pretty much necessary. And even if you're one of those people that's not on the internet all the time, you know what is? Your personal information. And there are people out there trying to hack you all the time. They want your email address, they want your phone number, they want your place of employment, and they want to do bad things with it. There's also fairly legitimate corporations and companies that want your information. They want it for marketing purposes. They're going to buy it. They're going to sell it. They're going to trade it. At the very least, it's annoying to you. It's a nuisance. It's aggravating. Your email gets cluttered up with spam email. You get robocalls all the time. That's at the very least. At the worst, it's a threat to your family, to your friends, to your personal information, to your banking, to your finances, to your security, to your safety, to your identity. It can be pretty serious. This video is sponsored by Aura. I got hacked and it was pretty obvious. This was about 8 or 9 months ago and there were red flags all over the place. And I didn't exactly know what to do, but I knew I needed to do something quickly. I mean quickly. I researched 8, 10, or 12 companies immediately. I went all over the place. I asked people. I was online looking for the best company that could serve my needs and secure my information. You know who I found? Aura. And I'm glad I did. It was amazing. I contacted them. They got right back to me immediately. Their customer support is phenomenal. Their customer service is first-rate, friendly. They are detailed. They know what they're doing, and they do it right, and they will protect you. In addition to everything I just mentioned, they've got a password-keeping service. Your credit score. They notify you anytime there's a possible data breach. This has happened to me a number of times. I'm getting notifications all the time when there's a possible compromise to my credit score or anything that I don't want. They've got a VPN that will allow you to browse the internet anonymously. It's amazing. And again, customer service support available 24/7. Click the link in the description section below and get 2 free weeks of Aura. Protect your finances, protect your information, protect your privacy, protect your identity. I did, and I'm glad I did. Aura, thank you so much for what you've done for me, and now for my Voice of College Football community.